Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you, the billionaire laughed. Then went silent, learning who he was. The helicopter blades cut through the morning air as Victoria Sterling laughed so loudly her voice echoed throughout the private hangar. At 34 years old, CEO of Sterling Aviation Holdings, she was accustomed to being the center of attention. Her $8,000 Armani suit contrasted brutally with the faded blue uniform of the man standing a few meters away, holding a mop. "Did you hear that, people?" Victoria shouted to the 15 executives and mechanics gathered around the newly acquired Robinson R-66 helicopter. "Our janitor thinks he can fly an $800,000 helicopter." Thomas Wright, 38 years old, a black man with an athletic build despite years away from military academies, didn't say a word. He simply watched Victoria with that disturbing calm that had irritated her since the day she'd hired him 6 months ago. That silence that made it seem like he knew something everyone else didn't. "Come on, Thomas," Victoria continued, walking in circles around him with her Louboutin heels clicking against the concrete. "You clean bathrooms and sweep hangars. But of course you also pilot complex aircraft, right? I bet you're also a surgeon in your spare time." Nervous laughter filled the hangar. Michael Chun, the 45-year-old operations manager, looked away uncomfortably. He had been the only one who suggested giving Thomas a chance when the man had shown up looking for work, any work, 6 months ago. Something in Thomas's eyes reminded Michael of his own father, a Vietnam veteran who never talked about the war but carried that same silent weight on his shoulders. It had all started 15 minutes earlier when Victoria brought her new toy to the hangar. She was explaining to executives the capabilities of the Robinson R-66, top speed of 240 km per hour, range of 560 km, capacity for 5 passengers, when she noticed Thomas cleaning windows near the aircraft. "Get away from that," she'd cut him off sharply. "Men like you shouldn't even breathe near such expensive equipment." Thomas had stepped back politely, but Victoria had seen something in his face when he looked at the helicopter. It wasn't envy or common admiration. It was familiarity. As if he recognized an old friend. "Something wrong, Thomas?" she provoked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Does the helicopter remind you of something? Maybe you've cleaned a similar one before." "No, ma'am," Thomas had responded calmly. "Just thinking the tail rotor needs adjustment. It's 0.3 degrees off ideal alignment. Could cause vibration above 180 km per hour." The hangar had fallen silent. Victoria had stared at him, surprised not by the technical observation, which she'd assumed was luck or something he'd heard mechanics say, but by the audacity of a janitor correcting her. "Excuse me," she'd said, voice icy. "You, who probably never saw a helicopter up close in your life, are telling me how to maintain my aircraft?" "No, ma'am. Just an observation." "An observation," Victoria had repeated, a malicious idea forming. "You know what? I'll make you a proposal. If you can start this helicopter, not fly it, just start the engines correctly, I'll marry you. Right here. Today." The laughter that followed was hysterical. Even Michael, who tried to be fair, let slip a smile. The idea of Victoria Sterling, billionaire, heiress to an aviation empire, marrying a janitor was too absurd not to be funny. But Thomas didn't laugh. He just looked at the helicopter, then at Victoria, and something changed in his expression. The resignation he'd carried for the last 6 months, that silent acceptance of every insult, every condescending look, every reminder of who he used to be evaporated. "Ms. Sterling," he said, voice still calm but with a sharp edge no one had heard before, "are you making an official proposal? Because if you are, I'd like everyone here to be witnesses." Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second. Something in his tone bothered her. But she was surrounded by executives, mechanics, pilots, people who expected her to maintain control, to demonstrate superiority. Backing down now would be weakness. "Absolutely," she declared, crossing her arms. "Witnesses, take note. If this man can even start the engine of this helicopter without blowing us all up, I, Victoria Sterling, will marry him." "Then you won't mind if I accept the challenge," Thomas said, not as a question but as a statement. And then, to everyone's absolute shock, he dropped the mop. The handle hit the concrete floor with a sound that echoed through the silent hangar. Thomas walked toward the helicopter with steps that weren't those of a janitor who cleaned floors. They were the steps of someone who knew exactly where he was going. "Wait," Victoria said, laughter dying in her throat. "You can't just. You made a proposal, Thomas interrupted her, turning to face her. For the first time in 6 months, he looked her directly in the eyes. And I accepted. Unless you were just making another joke at my expense. Which would be, what, the 100th this month? The silence that followed was so dense you could hear 15 people breathing. Victoria felt her face heat up, part anger, part something she couldn't identify. Shame, perhaps. But it was too late to back down. Go ahead, she said, voice tense. When you fail, I want you out of this hangar. Out of my company. Understood. Thomas didn't respond. He simply opened the helicopter door and entered the cockpit as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. What no one knew, except perhaps Michael Chun, who was beginning to have a disturbing suspicion, was that Thomas had done it 1,000 times before. And what was about to happen would not only change that morning but would completely destroy Victoria's image of herself, of the world, and of who truly deserved respect. As Thomas adjusted the seat with precise movements that made several mechanics exchange confused glances, Victoria felt for the first time in years something she hadn't experienced: doubt. And that chill down the spine that comes when you realize you've just made a terrible mistake. If this story of pride, judgment, and the most unexpected twist has captured your attention, subscribe to the channel, because what Thomas is about to do will prove that sometimes the person you least expect is exactly the one you should have respected from the beginning. Thomas's hands moved across the instrument panel with a fluidity that made the 3 certified pilots in the hangar freeze mid-breath. Master switch up. Battery on. Fuel pump engaged. Each movement was precise, economical, professional. He's following correct startup procedure, whispered Jake Morrison, Victoria's personal pilot for 8 years. The 52-year-old former commercial aviator stood next to his boss, face pale. That's not luck. That's training. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. He probably watched you start helicopters before. Monkeys can mimic behavior. But even as she said it, she knew it sounded hollow. Thomas wasn't mimicking. He was operating. The APU auxiliary power unit hummed to life. Thomas checked the gauges, his eyes scanning left to right in the exact pattern taught in flight school. Oil pressure, 45 psi and rising. Hydraulic pressure, green. Generator voltage, 28.5 volts. Impossible, Victoria muttered. This is impossible. Michael Chun stepped closer to her, voice low. Victoria, I think you should stop this. Right now. Stop what? Exposing a fraud. But her voice cracked slightly. Thomas reached for the throttle, and that's when it happened. His hand paused over the collective pitch lever, and for just a moment, his jaw clenched. Victoria saw it, a flash of something across his face. Pain. Memory. Loss. Then it vanished, replaced by iron focus. Rotor brake releasing, Thomas said to himself, though the microphone picked it up and broadcast it through the hangar speakers. His voice was different now. Harder. More commanding. Throttle to flight idle. The turbine began its characteristic whine, rising in pitch. The main rotor started turning, slowly at first, then building momentum. The distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter blades filled the massive space. Victoria's senior engineer, Patricia Williams, grabbed her boss's arm. Victoria, that startup sequence was perfect. Military perfect. Commercial pilots don't do it that smoothly. Where the hell did your janitor learn to fly? I don't know, Victoria said through clenched teeth, watching the rotor RPM climb to exactly 102%, the ideal range, and hold there without a single adjustment. Thomas had hit the mark on first try. Sarah Chun, Michael's wife and Sterling Aviation's chief financial officer, had been watching from her office window above the hangar floor. Now she came rushing down the metal stairs, heels clanging. Michael, who is that man? She demanded, arriving breathless. I just looked up his employment file. It's thin. Too thin. Just says he's 38, former military, honorable discharge. No details. No references. No previous employment beyond private security. That's a cover file. I've seen them before. Victoria spun to face Michael. You hired him. What do you know? Michael Chun had the decency to look uncomfortable. He came in 6 months ago, said he needed work. Any work. He looked like a man running from something. Or hiding from it. I didn't ask questions. You didn't ask questions? Victoria's voice rose. You hired someone with a suspicious background to work in a facility with $50 million worth of aircraft and sensitive aviation technology? He's been the best employee we have, Michael shot back. Never late. Never complains. Does jobs other people won't touch. And he's helped prevent 2 maintenance issues that could have been serious. Remember that fuel line leak on the Citation? Thomas spotted it during routine cleaning. Saved us from potential fire. In the helicopter, Thomas was now running through post-start checks. Cyclic, full range of motion. Collective, smooth throughout. Pedals, responsive. His movements were so automatic, so ingrained, that he was clearly operating on muscle memory developed over thousands of hours. Jake Morrison walked slowly toward the aircraft, drawn like a magnet. He peered into the cockpit, watching Thomas work. When he returned to Victoria, his face was grave. That's not civilian training, Jake said quietly. That's military. Probably special operations. The way he scans instruments, the order he checks systems. I flew with Army aviators in Iraq. That's how they move. Fast, efficient, no wasted motion. He's not just a pilot, Victoria. He's a combat pilot. Victoria felt the ground shifting under her expensive shoes. That's ridiculous. If he were some decorated military pilot, why would he be cleaning floors? Why do you think? Patricia Williams asked softly. Men come back from war changed. Broken sometimes. Maybe he couldn't fly anymore. Trauma, PTSD, medical discharge. Maybe this was the only way he could stay close to aviation without actually having to get in the cockpit again. Until today, Sarah added, watching Thomas through the helicopter's windscreen. Until someone pushed him hard enough that he had to prove himself. The implications hit Victoria like a physical blow. If Thomas was military, if he was qualified, then her mockery wasn't just cruel, it was a public humiliation of someone who'd served his country. Someone who'd sacrificed in ways she couldn't imagine. And she'd done it in front of 15 witnesses. Shut it down, Victoria called out, voice strained. Thomas, shut down the helicopter. You've made your point. But Thomas didn't respond. He sat in the pilot's seat, hands on the controls, staring straight ahead. The rotor continued spinning at exactly 102%. Thomas. Victoria shouted. I said shut it down. Still nothing. Jake Morrison started toward the helicopter, but Michael grabbed his arm. Wait, Michael said. Look at his face. Through the windscreen, they could see Thomas's expression. His eyes were closed. His lips were moving silently. And tears were streaming down his face. Oh God, Patricia whispered. He's having a flashback. Something triggered him. The hangar, moments ago filled with laughter and mockery, now held 15 people frozen in horror as they realized they'd broken something in this man. Victoria felt ice in her veins. What do we do? She asked, all arrogance gone from her voice. We wait, Michael said. And we pray he comes back. But what none of them knew, what Thomas hadn't told anyone in 6 months of silent labor, was that the last time he'd started a helicopter engine was 4 years ago. In Afghanistan. In a dust storm. Under enemy fire. With 3 wounded soldiers bleeding out in the back. He'd saved 2 of them. The third had died in his arms 30 seconds after they landed at the field hospital. Lieutenant Daniel Wright. His younger brother. Age 24. And as Thomas sat in Victoria Sterling's $800,000 helicopter, 6 months of suppressed grief came flooding back with a force that made him grip the controls until his knuckles went white. The helicopter's turbine whined, steady and strong. The rotor spun perfect circles overhead. And Thomas Wright remembered exactly why he'd sworn he'd never fly again. And why he was about to break that promise. Victoria watched him, pride and mockery forgotten, replaced by creeping horror at what she'd done. Because the man in her helicopter wasn't crying because he couldn't fly. He was crying because he could. And it was killing him to do it again. The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then Thomas opened his eyes, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and did something that made every pilot in the hangar's blood run cold. He increased throttle to takeoff power. Jesus Christ, he's going to fly it, Jake Morrison breathed, stumbling backward. Everyone get back. But Thomas wasn't preparing for flight. His hands moved across the panel with renewed purpose, running through a complete systems diagnostic that only someone with intimate knowledge of Robinson helicopters could perform. He checked transmission temperature, monitored torque, tested cyclic response at different collective settings. After 2 minutes of flawless operation, he smoothly reduced power, let the rotor RPM decay properly, and shut down the turbine with textbook precision. The whine of the engine faded, the rotor slowed, and finally stopped. Thomas sat motionless in the pilot's seat for a long moment. Then he opened the door, stepped down onto the hangar floor, and walked directly to Victoria. "Startup complete, Ms. Sterling," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "No explosions. As promised." Victoria couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Around her, 15 people stared at Thomas with expressions ranging from shock to awe to profound discomfort at what they just witnessed. "Who are you?" Victoria finally managed. "Your janitor, ma'am," Thomas replied. But there was no subservience in his tone now. "The one you just promised to marry." That was. "I wasn't, it was a joke." "Was it?" Thomas looked around the hangar, making eye contact with each witness. "Because I have 15 people who heard you make that promise. And I accepted. You said if I could start the engine, you'd marry me. I started it." Patricia Williams found her voice. "Victoria, we all heard you. You made it very clear. Very public. I'm not going to marry the janitor." Victoria's voice cracked with something between panic and rage. "That's insane." "Why?" Thomas asked quietly. "Because I clean floors? Because I'm black? Because I don't wear expensive suits? Or because you just realized that the man you've been treating like garbage for 6 months might actually be worth more than you assumed?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Victoria felt her face flush with heat. Sarah Chen stepped forward, phone in hand. "Victoria, I just sent a message to legal. They're reviewing the situation. In front of 15 witnesses, you made a verbal contract. Thomas accepted. And he fulfilled the condition." "It's not legally binding," Victoria snapped. It was clearly hyperbole. "Maybe," Michael said carefully. "But think about what happens when this story gets out. And it will get out. Billionaire CEO mocks janitor, promises to marry him if he can start helicopter. Janitor turns out to be expert pilot. CEO refuses to honor promise." How does that headline sound? Victoria felt the walls closing in. "This is ridiculous. I'm not." "Ms. Sterling," Thomas interrupted, voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to actually marry me. I know that was a cruel joke at my expense. Just like the 100 other jokes you've made these past 6 months." He took a step closer, and Victoria found herself unable to look away from his eyes. "But I am asking you to consider something. You didn't just insult a janitor today. You humiliated someone without knowing anything about who they were, what they'd done, or what they'd sacrificed. You made assumptions based on what you saw on the surface. And you were wrong." Victoria started, then stopped. Because he was right. And everyone knew it. Jake Morrison cleared his throat. "Thomas, I have to ask. What's your background? Because that startup sequence it was perfect. Better than perfect." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "I flew helicopters for 12 years. Army. Medevac and Special Operations Transport. Multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan." The gasps were audible. Patricia Williams put a hand over her mouth. "I got out 4 years ago," Thomas continued, voice flat. "Honorable discharge. And I decided I didn't want to fly anymore. So I found work doing other things. Quieter things. Why not get a job as a civilian pilot?" Sarah asked gently. "With your experience, you could work anywhere." "Because every time I get in a cockpit, I see the faces of people I couldn't save," Thomas said simply. "So I stopped getting in cockpits. Until today." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. "Thomas, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," he replied. "You saw a black man with a mop and made every assumption in the book. I was invisible to you. Until I wasn't. Michael Chun had been watching the exchange with growing understanding. That's why you always came in early, isn't it? Before anyone else arrived. You'd spend time in the hangar, just being near the aircraft. Thomas nodded. It's the closest I let myself get. Just cleaning them. Maintaining them from the outside. It was enough. Or I told myself it was. But it's not enough, Patricia said softly. Is it? A man with your skills, your training, your experience, and your cleaning floors. Thomas, that's not penance. That's punishment. Maybe I deserve punishment, Thomas said, voice cracking slightly. For what? Victoria found herself asking, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Thomas looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a depth of pain that made her earlier mockery seem even more monstrous. For the ones I didn't bring home. Before anyone could respond, the hangar's main door burst open. A woman in her 60s rushed in, face flushed with exertion and emotion. She wore a postal service uniform and carried a messenger bag. Thomas Wright, she called out, looking around frantically. Is there a Thomas Wright here? Thomas turned, face draining of color. Mrs. Patterson? The woman spotted him and nearly ran across the hangar floor. Thomas. I've been looking for you for 6 months. Why didn't you leave a forwarding address? Do you know how hard it is to find someone who doesn't want to be found? What are you doing here? Thomas looked genuinely shaken. The Army's been trying to reach you, Mrs. Patterson said, breathless. She pulled an official-looking envelope from her bag. This came to your old address. I've been holding it, hoping you'd come back. But when you didn't, I hired someone to track you down. Thomas, this is important. Thomas took the envelope with trembling hands. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense. Victoria watched as he opened it, scanned the contents, and went absolutely still. Whatever was in that letter had just changed everything. What is it? Michael asked quietly. Thomas looked up, eyes glistening. They're awarding me the Distinguished Flying Cross. 4 actions in Afghanistan 4 years ago. The ceremony is in 3 weeks. Washington, D.C. They want me to attend. To be honored. The hangar exploded with murmurs. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the military's highest honors, awarded for extraordinary heroism in flight. What did you do? Jake Morrison asked, voice filled with awe. Thomas folded the letter carefully, hands shaking. I got 2 soldiers home. Under conditions that... He stopped, swallowed hard. They said it was impossible. But they were bleeding out. So I flew anyway. And the 3rd soldier? Patricia asked gently. My brother, Thomas said simply. Lieutenant Daniel Wright. He didn't make it. I've spent 4 years thinking maybe if I'd flown faster, pulled a different approach, done something different. His voice broke. The Army wants to give me a medal for the day I failed to save him. Victoria felt tears burning her eyes. Thomas, that's not... You can't blame yourself for... Can't I? He looked at her, and she saw a man who'd been carrying impossible weight for too long. You spent 6 months seeing me as nothing but a janitor. But at least you saw me as alive. I've spent 4 years seeing myself as the man who let his little brother die. So tell me, Ms. Sterling, which of us had the more accurate view? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Mrs. Patterson put a gentle hand on Thomas's arm. Danny wouldn't want you living like this. You know that. He'd want you flying. He'd want you honored for saving those other boys. I know what Danny would want, Thomas said roughly. But I also know I'm the one who made it home and he didn't. And I don't know how to live with that, Mrs. Patterson. I've been trying for 4 years, and I still don't know. Victoria watched this man, this hero she'd mocked, humiliated, treated as less than human, break apart in front of 15 witnesses. And she realized that the cruelty she'd inflicted wasn't just about today's joke. It was about 6 months of systematic degradation of someone who'd already been through more pain than she could imagine. Thomas, she said quietly, stepping forward. I need to tell you something. He looked at her, eyes raw with emotion. I was wrong, Victoria said, voice shaking. Not just today. Every day for 6 months. I saw your uniform and decided you were invisible. I saw your silence and decided you were simple. I saw your humility and decided you were weak. I was wrong about all of it. Ms. Sterling. Victoria, she interrupted. My name is Victoria. And I'm standing here in front of everyone and telling you that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. For every joke. Every insult. Every moment I made you feel less than what you are. Thomas studied her face, looking for insincerity. But Victoria met his gaze steadily, letting him see her shame. I can't undo the past 6 months, she continued. But I can do something about the next 6. Thomas, you're not fired. You're promoted. Aviation consultant. Full salary. Health benefits. And if you want it, flight clearance for any aircraft in this hangar. The offer hung in the air. Thomas looked at the helicopter, then back at Victoria. I don't know if I can fly again, he admitted. Starting the engine today, it brought everything back. The noise. The vibration. The memories. I don't know if I'm ready. Then don't fly, Patricia Williams said firmly. Consult. Teach. Share your knowledge. But do it as who you really are. Not as the man hiding behind a mop. Michael Chen nodded. And in 3 weeks, you go to Washington. You accept that medal. You let them honor you for what you did. Because Thomas, even if you can't forgive yourself yet, those 2 soldiers you saved get to live their lives because of you. That matters. That has to matter. Thomas looked around the hangar at 15 faces that 6 months ago had seen him as invisible, and now saw him as something else entirely. Human. Heroic. Worthy. I need time to think, he said finally. Take all the time you need, Victoria replied. But Thomas? That proposal I made? Consider it real. Not the marriage part, she added quickly, but the promise behind it. You proved yourself today. More than I ever had the right to ask. So I'm making you a different promise now. Whatever you need, whatever will help you heal, if it's in my power to give it, it's yours. Thomas nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Sterling. Victoria, she corrected gently. Victoria, he repeated. The name felt strange in his mouth after 6 months of careful formality. Mrs. Patterson squeezed his arm. Come on, dear. Let me buy you coffee. We can talk about Washington. About Danny. About what comes next. As Thomas walked toward the hangar door with the postal worker who'd tracked him down, Victoria watched him go. She felt Michael Chun move to stand beside her. That, Michael said quietly, is the bravest man I've ever met. And you almost destroyed him. I know, Victoria whispered. God help me, I know. But what Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the letter from the Department of Defense contained more than just an award ceremony invitation. It contained a second page. A classified addendum. Instructions for Thomas to report to a secure facility in Virginia. Because the Army hadn't been trying to find Thomas just to give him a medal. They'd been trying to find him because they needed him. One more time. For a mission that only someone with his specific skills could accomplish. And in 3 weeks, Thomas Wright would have to decide whether he was truly done flying. Or whether some promises to country, to fallen brothers, to the 2 men whose lives he'd saved, demanded that he get back in the cockpit one final time. The helicopter sat silent in the hangar, rotor blades still. Waiting. Like it knew that the Rayall story was just beginning. 3 weeks passed in a blur that none of them could have anticipated. Victoria Sterling stood in her office on the morning Thomas was scheduled to leave for Washington, staring at the folder Michael Chun had placed on her desk. Her hands trembled as she read through Thomas Wright's military service record, the full, unredacted version. My God, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Michael, do you understand what this says? Michael stood by the window, watching Thomas in the hangar below. I do. That's why I thought you needed to see it before he left. Captain Thomas Wright. 2,847 flight hours in combat zones. 137 medevac missions. 284 lives saved under fire. 3 silver stars. 2 bronze stars with valor. A purple heart. And the final mission. August 15th, 4 years ago. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. 3 wounded soldiers trapped by ambush, including Lieutenant Daniel Wright Thomas's younger brother. Dust storm, Zero visibility. Command ordered all aircraft grounded. Thomas took off anyway. The flight recorder transcript showed Thomas landing in conditions 3 military aviation experts later testified was categorically impossible. He got 2 soldiers out alive. Daniel died 90 seconds after landing, despite Thomas performing CPR with broken ribs. The army wanted to court-martial him for disobeying orders. But the families of the soldiers he saved raised such a storm that they quietly processed his discharge and let him disappear. Until now. Victoria closed the folder with shaking hands. The second page of that letter. The classified addendum. Did you find out what it was? Civilian helicopter down in Colombia, Michael said carefully. 12 people, including 3 Americans. They survived the crash, but they're in hostile territory. State Department can't send official military rescue. So they want Thomas, Victoria said, understanding flooding through her. As a civilian contractor. Because he's the only pilot who's proven he can fly the impossible. They're offering $2 million and full rehabilitation of his service record, Michael confirmed. Victoria stood abruptly. He's going to say yes. He's going to get himself killed trying to save people he doesn't know, because he couldn't save his brother. Maybe, Michael said. Or maybe that's who Thomas Wright is. Victoria grabbed her jacket. Where is he? Hangar 3. Since 4 a.m. She ran. In $1,200 heels, Victoria Sterling sprinted across the compound, heart hammering. She found him standing before the Robinson R-66, duffel bag at his feet, the Department of Defense letter in his hand. You're going, Victoria said, breathless. Thomas turned, surprised. Ms. Sterling. I was going to. Victoria, she interrupted. Please. After everything, just call me Victoria. He nodded. I was going to thank you. For the promotion. For treating me like a human being these past 3 weeks. Don't thank me for doing what I should have done from the beginning. Thomas, I read your file. I know what you did in Afghanistan. I know about Daniel. His jaw tightened. Then you know why I have to do this. Colombia, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. His eyes widened. That's classified. I'm terrified, Thomas. 12 people need rescue and you're going to fly into a war zone because you couldn't save your brother. That's not heroism. That's suicide. Those people are going to die if someone doesn't get them out, Thomas said quietly. I've done it before. I can do it again. You almost died doing it before. But I didn't die, Thomas said sharply. 2 soldiers got to go home. That matters, Victoria. And these 12 people matter. I can't let them die because I'm afraid. Victoria stepped closer. You're not afraid of dying. You're afraid of living. You've been punishing yourself for 4 years for something that wasn't your fault. You don't understand. I understand that I spent 6 months treating a hero like garbage. Victoria's voice cracked. I understand that the bravest man I've ever met has been cleaning my floors while hating himself for living. And there's a very real chance you won't come back. Thomas stared at her, shocked. I have no right to ask this after how I treated you, Victoria continued, voice dropping. But please, let me help. I have resources. Money. We can hire a team. Victoria, Thomas said gently, hand on her shoulder. This isn't your responsibility. You became my responsibility the moment I hired you. And I failed every single day for 6 months. Let me make it right. Thomas picked up his duffel and walked to the small office at the back, where he'd eaten lunch alone for 6 months. Victoria followed. The walls were covered with photographs. Children smiling. Families embracing. Young soldiers giving thumbs up from hospital beds. These are the people I saved, Thomas said quietly. Every mission, I got their names. Found them afterward. Some send me letters. Birthday cards. Wedding invitations. He pointed to 2 men with prosthetic legs, grinning. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chin and Corporal James Wilson. The 2 from Helmand. Marcus just had his 2nd kid. James got married last year. Victoria's breath caught. And these, Thomas continued, pointing to a smaller wall, are the ones I couldn't save. Including Danny. 20 photos. Young faces. Daniel right in the center. I look at this wall every day, Thomas said roughly. 284 saved. 20 not saved. 93% success rate. But all I see are these 20 faces. Thomas. He pulled out his phone, showed her a message. Captain Wright, this is Sarah Mitchell. You saved my husband James Wilson 4 years ago. Our daughter Emily calls your photo the angel pilot. I know they're asking you to fly again. If there's any chance you can bring those people home the way you brought James home, 12 Emilis are praying you say yes. The attached photo showed a little girl holding a drawing of a helicopter with angel wings. Victoria's vision blurred. Oh God. So you see, I don't have a choice, Thomas said quietly. If I don't go, I'm saying those 12 lives don't matter as much as my pain. And I can't live with that. When do you leave? Ceremony tomorrow. Mission in 72 hours. Victoria made a decision. I'm coming with you. To Washington. To the ceremony. Someone who appreciates what that medal means should be there. Why? Because I owe you. Because I want the world to see you the way I see you now. And because 3 weeks ago you asked me to honor a promise, and I refused. I called it absurd. Victoria, that was. I'm not asking you to marry me, she interrupted. But I am asking you to let me honor what I promised. Whatever you need to heal, if it's in my power, it's yours. And what you need is to not be alone anymore. Before Thomas could respond, the hangar door opened. Jake Morrison, Patricia Williams, Sarah Chun, Michael, and every employee who'd witnessed the confrontation 3 weeks ago entered. We heard you're leaving, Patricia said. We wanted to say something. Jake stood at attention and saluted. Captain Wright, it's an honor to serve alongside you. One by one, they came forward. Handshakes. Salutes. Respect. Michael was last. He hugged Thomas briefly. Bring them home. Then come home yourself. Because we need you here. Thomas looked around, overwhelmed. I don't know if I'll make it back. Then we'll pray every day, Patricia said firmly. And if you don't come back, Sarah added, voice breaking, we'll make sure everyone knows who you were. Captain Thomas Wright. Hero. Victoria stepped forward and took his hand. And when you come back, I'm going to prove I can see you the way you deserve. Not as someone I humiliated, but as someone I respect, admire, and... She stopped. And... Thomas prompted. And someone I'd be honored to know, Victoria finished, not quite ready to say what she really felt. Thomas squeezed her hand. I should go. We're coming with you, Victoria said. I chartered a plane. Michael, Jake, Patricia, Sarah, we're all going. You're not receiving that medal alone. Thomas nodded, unable to speak. As the group moved toward the door, Victoria lingered. 3 weeks ago, you told me appearances deceive, she said quietly. You were right. But you're wearing a mask too. The mask of a man who thinks he deserves punishment. Then who am I? He asked, voice raw. Victoria looked at him. You're the man who flies into storms to save people. Even when it costs you everything. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to forgive yourself for being human. She paused. And maybe you deserve a CEO willing to admit she was catastrophically wrong about you. Thomas almost smiled. That's a lot to admit. You taught me more in 3 weeks than 34 years of privilege ever did. So when you come home from Columbia, and I'm believing you will because the alternative is unbearable, I'm going to prove I learned the lesson. Victoria, Thomas said softly, you already do. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet. But recognition. Understanding. Respect. For Thomas Wright, who'd been invisible for so long, being truly seen was worth more than any medal. Even if he had to fly into hell one more time to earn the right to believe it. 14 days later, Victoria Sterling stood in her office at 3 a.m., phone clutched in white-knuckled hands, staring at the news alert that had just shattered her world. Civilian rescue helicopter reported down in Colombian jungle. 12 humanitarian workers feared dead. No survivors expected. Her knees buckled. Michael Chun caught her before she hit the floor. No, Victoria whispered. No, no, no. He can't be. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered with trembling hands. Ms. Sterling. A man's voice, American accent, military bearing. This is Colonel Martinez, U.S. Southern Command. I'm calling about Captain Wright. Victoria couldn't breathe. Is he alive? The colonel said quickly. They're all alive. All 13, the 12 workers and Captain Wright. He got them out. The sob that tore from Victoria's throat was primal. Where is he? Medical facility in Bogota. He's... A pause. He's asking for you, ma'am. 22 hours later, Victoria walked into a hospital room in Colombia. Thomas sat on the bed, left arm in a sling, face bruised, but alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. You came, he said, voice rough. Did you think I wouldn't? Victoria crossed the room, stopped inches from him. Thomas, when I heard that helicopter went down, her voice broke. I realized something terrifying. What? That somewhere in the last month, you stopped being the janitor I humiliated. You stopped being the employee I owed an apology. You became... She took a shaking breath. You became someone I couldn't imagine losing. Thomas stared at her. Victoria. Let me finish, she said. I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to feel this way after how I treated you. But Thomas, when I thought you were dead, I understood what you've been living with for 4 years. That grief. That guilt. That sense that the world is darker because someone isn't in it anymore. She touched his uninjured hand. You saved 12 people. Flew through conditions that downed the first helicopter. Landed in a clearing that was 30 feet too small. Got every single person out alive. The colonel told me they're calling it the most remarkable civilian rescue in 20 years. I was just doing what needed to be done, Thomas said quietly. No, Victoria said firmly. You were being who you've always been. The hero who flies into impossible situations because lives matter more than fear. But Thomas, you need to understand something. Your life matters too. She pulled out her phone, showed him photos. This is Marcus Chen's daughter. 2 weeks old. Named her Thomasina. And this is James Wilson standing at the grave of his best friend, your brother Daniel, leaving flowers and a note that says, Denny, your brother brought me home again. Still the best wingman in heaven. Tears streamed down Thomas's face. And this, Victoria continued, showing a news article, is what happened after word got out about what you did. 147 families of people you've saved over 12 years have started a foundation in your name. The Daniel Wright Memorial Scholarship for veterans struggling with PTSD. They raised $3 million in 1 week. Thomas couldn't speak. You spent 4 years thinking you failed your brother, Victoria said softly. But Thomas, Danny's death meant something. Because it made you the pilot who would risk everything to save others. It made you the man who wouldn't let 12 people die in a jungle. Your brother's sacrifice created a hero who saved 296 lives now. That's his legacy. And yours. I don't deserve. Stop, Victoria interrupted. You deserve everything. Respect. Recognition. Healing. And maybe. She hesitated. Maybe someone who sees you not as the janitor or the hero, but just as Thomas. The man who taught a billionaire what dignity really means. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. What are you saying? Victoria smiled through tears. I'm saying that 3 weeks ago, I jokingly promised to marry you if you could start a helicopter. And you did. And I laughed it off. But Thomas, if you asked me today, really asked me, not as a joke but as 2 people who've been through something profound together, I wouldn't laugh. I'd say yes. The silence stretched. Then Thomas said quietly, I'm not asking you to marry me, Victoria. Her heart dropped. Oh, I understand. I'm asking you to have dinner with me, Thomas continued, a small smile playing at his lips. Just dinner. Let's start there. Because you're right, this is complicated. You were my boss who humiliated me. I was the employee hiding from his past. But maybe we can be something else now. Something honest. Victoria laughed, relief flooding through her. Dinner. Yes. Absolutely yes. Good, Thomas said. Because I realized something in that jungle. When I thought I might not make it out. I realized that I've spent 4 years being invisible, and the one person who finally made me want to be seen again was the same person who'd made me feel most invisible. That seemed like something worth exploring. Worth exploring, Victoria repeated, smiling. I'll take it. 6 months later, Thomas Wright stood in Sterling Aviation's newest facility, the Thomas Wright Flight Training Center for Veterans. Victoria had built it with her own money, hired Thomas as director, and watched him transform dozens of struggling veterans into confident pilots. You know, Thomas said, watching a student complete her first solo flight, I used to think the worst thing that ever happened to me was losing Daniel. But maybe the worst thing was forgetting that his death didn't make me less. It made me more. Victoria, standing beside him, took his hand. And the best thing? Thomas looked at her, eyes clear and peaceful for the first time in years. The best thing was a billionaire who taught me that sometimes you have to be broken down completely before you can be built back up as someone better. Both of us. So we both learned something, Victoria said. Yeah, Thomas agreed. That respect isn't about titles or money or power. It's about seeing the human being in front of you and honoring their dignity. Even when they're holding a mop. Especially when they're holding a mop. If this story of prejudice, redemption, and discovering that heroes don't always look like we expect touched your heart, subscribe to our channel. Because the most important lesson Thomas and Victoria learned is one we all need. The person you underestimate today might be the person who changes your life tomorrow. Never judge by appearances. Always look deeper. Because dignity, courage, and worth have nothing to do with what you see on the surface, and everything to do with who someone truly is. They tried to define Thomas by his uniform. But he defined himself by his character. And in the end, that's the only definition that matters.